Evelyn stood at the wooden gate of the old ranch house, her basket of groceries resting against her hip. The wind carried dust across the open fields, brushing against her face the way a gentle reminder does. She had been here many times in her younger days, usually with her late husband, but today felt different. Today she had come because someone needed help, and in her heart she knew she could not ignore that need. Caleb, the cowboy who lived alone on this land, had recently returned after a serious accident. Most people in town had heard stories of how he had pushed himself too quickly, trying to work despite his injuries, trying to pretend that nothing had changed. But things had changed, and even though he would never say it out loud, everyone could see the tired look in his eyes when he rode into town for supplies. Evelyn had seen it too the last time she met him. She knocked softly on the door, not wanting to startle him. The sound echoed through the quiet house, and after a moment, she heard slow, uneven footsteps approaching. When the door opened, Caleb stood there, leaning slightly against the frame, his brown hat tipped low as if trying to hide the exhaustion in his face. "Evelyn," he said quietly, almost surprised. She offered him a warm smile. "I brought a few things. I thought you might need them." He hesitated, his eyes drifting to the basket in her hands. "You didn't have to come all this way." "I know," she replied gently, "but I wanted to." Then she added with a light tone, "I'll cook whatever you want." For a moment, Caleb said nothing. A small part of him looked as though he wanted to refuse out of pride, but another part, the part carrying a silent loneliness, softened. Finally, he moved aside to let her in. "Thank you," he murmured, almost too quietly for her to hear. As she stepped inside, Caleb closed the door behind her. The dry wind outside pushed against it, making the wooden frame rattle. He turned the key and locked it, not because of fear or secrecy, but because in this region a sudden gust could slam the door open hard enough to break the hinges. Still, the small clicking sound of the lock echoed louder than usual in the stillness of the house. Evelyn looked around the room, noticing how things were scattered. Boots near the fireplace, a coat hanging on a chair, a half-eaten piece of bread left on the table. She saw the signs of a man trying to manage everything alone but struggling to keep up. "You've been busy," she said kindly, placing the basket on the counter. Caleb let out a tired breath. "I've been trying to keep things in order. Some days are harder than others." She glanced at him, seeing the fatigue in the way his shoulders sagged. "That's why I'm here," she said softly. "You don't have to do everything alone." He looked down as if unsure how to respond. Admitting he needed help was not something he was used to. Cowboys carried pride the way they carried saddles, close and firm. But even pride grows heavy when life shifts unexpectedly. Evelyn began opening the basket. She took out vegetables, some beans, spices, and a small loaf of soft bread she had baked earlier that morning. The kitchen smelled like dust and old wood, but soon it would smell of warm food and comfort, something this house clearly needed. Caleb sat at the table, watching her move around the kitchen with practiced ease. She had always been known for her cooking, not just because her food tasted good, but because it carried warmth. She believed food was a way of speaking without words. "You didn't have to bring all this," he said again. "I know," she repeated with a soft laugh, "but you looked like you needed a good meal." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Maybe I did." Evelyn chopped the vegetables slowly, listening to the gentle ticking of the old wall clock. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt peaceful, like two people who understood each other without needing to fill every second with conversation. After a while, Caleb finally spoke. "I used to help my mother cook when I was younger. She taught me how to bake bread and stew beans. But it's been a long time since I made anything proper." Evelyn stirred the pot on the stove. "Your mother must have been a good cook." "She was," he said quietly. She always said a warm meal could mend a tired heart. Evelyn smiled. She was right. Caleb's gaze drifted outside toward the open fields. The land looked endless, a sea of golden grass swaying under the wind. He had grown up here, worked here, built his whole life on this soil. But ever since the accident, everything felt heavier. The tasks he once did with ease now took double the time. The silence of the house echoed louder. The weight of loneliness pressed deeper. Seeing him lost in thought, Evelyn handed him a cup of warm tea. He accepted it with a small nod of thanks. "What made you come today?" he asked after a moment. She thought about the question. "I guess I understand what it feels like to live with quiet days. After my husband passed, the house felt too big. The silence felt too long. Helping someone somehow makes the days feel less empty." Caleb looked at her with a softness he rarely showed. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "It's all right," she said gently. "We all learn to live again in different ways." The pot began to bubble, filling the room with a comforting smell. Caleb breathed in deeply, letting the warmth settle around him. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel cold or lonely. It felt alive again. Evelyn set the table, placing simple dishes and spoons with care. She had always believed that food tasted better when served with thoughtfulness. When everything was ready, she called Caleb to join her. He sat across from her, picking up the spoon slowly, almost as if he wanted the moment to last. The first bite brought a softness to his eyes. "This is really good," he said. "I'm glad," she replied with a warm smile. "You need strength?" He nodded. "I do. More than I like to admit." They ate quietly, stopping only to share small stories about the weather, the ranch, the neighbors in town. Nothing dramatic, nothing heavy, just simple conversation that eased the heart. Little by little, the house felt less like a lonely space and more like a place where hope could breathe again. When they finished eating, Evelyn began clearing the dishes, but Caleb stood up quickly. "Let me help," he insisted. She smiled at his stubbornness. "Only if it doesn't hurt your back?" He gave a small laugh. "I'll manage." Together they cleaned the kitchen. It wasn't just about washing plates. It was about restoring a space that had been neglected, about bringing life back to a home that had been quiet for too long. As they worked, the wind outside howled softly, pushing against the walls. But inside, everything felt safe, warm, and calm. By the time the kitchen was clean, Caleb looked more relaxed than when she had arrived. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Not just for the food, for being here." Evelyn gave a gentle nod. "You're welcome. Sometimes all someone needs is a little company." Caleb walked her to the door as she gathered her things. The lock clicked open, and the wind rushed in, cool and strong. She stepped onto the porch, feeling the dry air against her cheeks. "I'll check on you again," she said before leaving. "You don't have to face everything alone." He met her eyes, gratitude clear in his expression. "I'd like that." As she walked to her truck, she glanced back one more time. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching quietly, his posture no longer heavy but a little more hopeful. In that moment, Evelyn realized that today wasn't just about cooking a meal. It was about giving someone a reason to breathe easier. It was about reminding two lonely hearts that kindness still had a place in this world. And somewhere deep inside, both of them felt something gently shift, something simple, something healing, something real. When Evelyn returned to the kitchen after washing her hands, the quiet sound of the wind brushing against the windows made the house feel even more peaceful. The meal she had cooked still left a soft, warm smell in the air, like comfort settling into every corner of the room. Caleb sat at the table, his fingers wrapped around the cup of tea she had given him earlier, though he hadn't taken a sip for a while. He seemed lost in thought, staring at the wooden grains of the table as if trying to find answers in them. Evelyn didn't want to disturb whatever was running through his mind, so she moved gently around the kitchen, wiping the counters and putting things back in place. She didn't clean because she had to. She did it because she knew that a tidy kitchen made a person feel more in control, especially someone who had been struggling to keep up with daily chores. After a few minutes, Caleb finally looked up. "It's been a long time since the house smelled like real food," he said quietly. Evelyn smiled softly. "Homes miss simple things like that more than we think." Caleb nodded. He looked tired. But there was something softer in his eyes now, something almost peaceful. "I used to love it when my mother cooked," he said. "The whole place would feel alive. Even the walls felt warmer." "Food can do that," Evelyn replied. "It holds memories." He sighed. "I guess I've been avoiding those memories. Too many things changed after the accident." She paused, wiping her hands on a towel before taking the seat across from him. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." But Caleb shook his head. "No. Maybe I should. People in town keep asking, but I don't like talking when I feel rushed. You're different. You don't push." Evelyn folded her hands on the table, giving him her full attention. He took a deep breath. "When I came back from the hospital, everything felt unfamiliar. I had been working on this land since I was a child. I knew every corner, every trail, every sound of the earth. But suddenly, it felt like the ranch didn't know me anymore. Things I used to do without thinking became difficult. And doing them reminded me of the days when I could move freely." His voice softened as he spoke. Evelyn could hear the frustration beneath his words, the quiet frustration of someone who had always relied on strength, only to wake up one day and find that strength missing. "Some days," he continued, "I wake up thinking I can handle it. Then I try lifting something or working with the animals and I feel the pain. It's like the land watches me struggle." Evelyn looked at him with empathy. "You've been through a lot. Healing takes time." He let out a weak laugh. "I'm not good at waiting." "You're not alone in that," she said kindly. "But time does its work whether we like it or not." Caleb looked at her for a moment, studying her calm expression. "You make it sound easy." "It's not easy," she admitted, "but it's possible." They both fell silent for a moment. The wind outside pushed harder against the walls, making the wooden structure groan lightly. It wasn't a scary sound. It was the sound of a house standing strong against nature, one gust at a time. Evelyn rose from the chair and opened the window just a little to let in fresh air. A soft breeze filled the room, carrying the scent of grass and dry soil. It reminded her of summer evenings she had once shared with her late husband. Quiet evenings where even silence felt like a companion rather than emptiness. "You know," she said gently, "when my husband passed, I didn't want to enter the kitchen for weeks. I felt like cooking without him sitting at the table made the room colder." Caleb listened quietly. "Then one day," she continued, "I decided to bake bread again, just like I used to. And while I worked, I remembered all the mornings when he would sneak a piece before it cooled. It hurt, but it also made me smile. Sometimes doing the thing that hurts a little can help more than doing nothing at all." Caleb looked thoughtful, as if her words had found a place inside him. "Maybe that's why I stopped cooking," he said. "Too many old memories, too much silence." "And too much silence leads to heavy thoughts," Evelyn said softly. He nodded. "You're right." Evelyn saw the half-finished loaf of bread on his table, the one he probably ate without appetite, just to get by. She walked to it, lifted it gently, and said, "Let's make something better for later." "You've already done enough," Caleb said, though he didn't sound like he wanted her to stop. "It's not about doing enough," she replied. "It's about making sure you have what you need." She took out the vegetables she hadn't used earlier, chopped them with steady hands, and placed them in a small pan. The soft sound of cutting filled the room, peaceful and rhythmic. Caleb watched in silence, almost soothed by the simple movements. After a while, he stood and walked over to her side. "Can I help?" Evelyn looked at him with gentle approval. "Of course. You can wash these." He took the bowl she handed him and began rinsing the vegetables under warm water. His hands moved slowly at first, as if unsure, but then he settled into the motion. It was a small task, but it made him feel useful again, even if only for a few minutes. Evelyn worked beside him, and the two of them moved quietly, like people who understood the value of simple company. As they worked, Caleb finally spoke again. "You know, when I locked the door earlier, I didn't want you to think anything strange. It's just, when the wind gets strong, it can throw this door wide open. I've had it happen before." Evelyn smiled lightly. "I understand. You don't have to explain." "But I wanted to," he said softly. "I don't want you feeling uncomfortable in my home." His sincerity warmed her heart. "I felt safe," she said simply. "I still do." Caleb didn't respond right away, but the slight easing of his shoulders showed her that her words meant something to him. When the extra meal was ready, Evelyn placed it into 2 small containers she found in his cupboard. She arranged them neatly in the fridge so he could warm them up later without any effort. Little gestures like these mattered more than people realized. "You didn't have to do all that," Caleb said again, but this time there was a small smile in his voice. Evelyn laughed softly. "You really like that sentence, don't you?" He shook his head, amused. "I'm just not used to being taken care of." "Well," she replied, "everyone needs care sometimes." They both sat at the table again, letting the peaceful quiet fill the space between them. The lantern on the counter flickered slightly as the wind shifted. Caleb leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting toward the window. "You've made the house feel alive again," he said softly. "I didn't realize how much I missed that." Evelyn folded her hands and looked at him gently. Houses aren't meant to stay quiet forever. They wait for footsteps, voices, the smell of food. They wait for life. Caleb nodded slowly, absorbing her words like someone listening to the truth for the first time. "You brought life back today," he said. "And you allowed me to," she replied. The wind continued outside, but inside the house, everything felt warmer. The kitchen no longer felt like a place of silence. It felt like a place where 2 people had shared comfort, understanding, and quiet strength. It was a simple moment, but it was enough to remind both of them that healing often begins with small steps, a meal, a conversation, a kind presence. And tonight, in the middle of an old ranch house surrounded by endless fields, 2 lonely hearts found a little peace through the warmth of simple companionship. The warm smell of cooked food slowly faded from the kitchen, but the comfort it had created still hung in the air like a gentle blanket. Evelyn and Caleb sat quietly for a few minutes after cleaning the dishes. There was a calmness between them, the kind that forms when 2 people share honest conversations after a long time of keeping their feelings locked inside. Outside, the wind settled a little, leaving only a soft humming sound along the walls of the old ranch house. It felt as if nature itself had paused to give them space. Caleb leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting toward the lantern on the counter. Its dim, steady glow reminded him of evenings long ago, nights when his parents would sit at the same table, talking about their day, laughing at small things, and filling the house with warmth. Those days felt far away now, almost like a different life. Evelyn noticed the distant look in his eyes. "You're thinking about something," she said softly. He let out a quiet breath. "Just remembering." "Good memories?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Mostly. Some are painful too, but they're still mine." Evelyn understood. Sometimes memories hurt not because they're bad, but because they remind a person of what they lost. Caleb sat forward, folding his hands. Do you ever feel like life changes so quickly that you don't have time to accept it? She smiled softly, a smile filled with understanding, not pity. I felt that way for a long time after my husband passed. One day I was helping him in the garden, and the next day, everything felt empty. I didn't know how to fit into the world without him. Caleb looked down. That's exactly it. I don't know who I am right now. I've always been strong, always busy. I worked from sunrise to sunset. But ever since the accident, ever since the pain and the trouble moving, I feel like a different man, and I don't know how to handle that version of myself. Evelyn rested her hands on the table. You're still you, Caleb. You're just going through a difficult time. Everyone does at some point. He shook his head slowly. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, she replied, but it's real. There was silence for a moment, not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. Caleb exhaled deeply. Do you want to know something strange? People in town always come to me for help. Fixing fences, working with their animals, carrying heavy things. I was the person everyone called when they needed strength. But when I needed help, I didn't know who to call. It felt like asking for help meant admitting I failed. Evelyn shook her head. It doesn't. Asking for help means you're human. He gave a faint laugh. I'm learning that now. She could see how hard it was for him to open up, but she also saw how much lighter he seemed with every word he shared. The lantern flickered slightly, making their shadows shift across the wall. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing dust along the window. The house creaked gently, but inside everything felt safe. Evelyn glanced around the kitchen. This house has seen many memories, hasn't it? Caleb nodded slowly. My parents built it. Every nail, every piece of wood, they worked on it together. After they passed, I stayed here. The memories kept me grounded. And now? She asked. He looked around, his expression softening. Now it feels like the memories are the only things holding the place together. Evelyn smiled gently. Maybe all it needs is a bit of care, just like you. He chuckled quietly, but his eyes softened in a grateful way that didn't need words. For a few moments, they listened to the wind whistling outside. Then Evelyn asked, Can you tell me what happened the day of the accident? Only if you feel comfortable. Caleb took a slow breath. I was repairing a fence near the south side of the ranch. One of the horses got startled when a truck passed on the road and kicked hard. I fell, hit the ground wrong, and injured my back. It wasn't anyone's fault, but it changed everything. Evelyn nodded calmly, letting him take his time. He continued. At first, I thought I would recover quickly, but the pain stayed. The work became harder. I couldn't move the way I used to. And slowly, I started avoiding the things I loved because they reminded me of what I couldn't do. Evelyn's voice was soft. That must have been hard. It was, he admitted quietly. Still is. But you're not alone anymore, she said gently. You have people around you, even if they don't always know how to help. Caleb gave a small smile. Like you. Evelyn looked at him sincerely. Yes, like me. The warmth between them wasn't romantic or complicated. It was human, simple, and needed. A kind of connection built from shared pain and shared strength. Caleb picked up the lantern and set it in the center of the table. My father used to say that if two people share light, the darkness around them feels smaller. Evelyn smiled. He was wise. He was, Caleb said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and longing. She could see the love he still held for his family, and she admired that. Not everyone kept old memories alive with such care. After a few quiet minutes, Evelyn stood and stretched her back. Why don't we check the pantry together? She suggested. You might have more things than you think. Caleb raised an eyebrow. You want to organize it? She grinned playfully. Let's just say I'm curious. He chuckled and followed her to the small pantry near the hallway. When he opened the door, Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. Jars were stacked unevenly, some tilted, some empty. Bags of flour and rice sat open, and a few cans were pushed far back, covered with a thin layer of dust. Caleb scratched his head. Yeah, I haven't really kept up with it. Evelyn laughed softly. It's all right. We can fix it. They started pulling things out one by one. Evelyn checked dates, wiped jars, arranged everything into neat rows. Caleb handed items to her, leaning carefully so he wouldn't strain himself. They worked like a small team, talking and laughing lightly along the way. At one point, Caleb found an old jar of honey. My mother gave me this, he said quietly. I never opened it. Evelyn held the jar gently. Keep it. Some things aren't just food, they're memories. He nodded, placing it on the highest shelf like something precious. As they finished organizing, the pantry looked brighter, cleaner, and more welcoming. Caleb's face softened when he looked at it. It hasn't looked this good in years, he said. Evelyn glanced at him. Sometimes, to feel better inside, we start by cleaning something outside. He thought about that, then smiled. You're full of simple wisdom. Life taught me, she replied. They walked back to the table, but this time Caleb's steps seemed a little lighter. Maybe it was because the house felt more alive, or maybe it was because he didn't feel so alone anymore. Evelyn poured him a bit of water, and Caleb took a sip. I didn't realize how much I needed today, he said softly. She looked at him warmly. Healing often starts with things we don't expect. He nodded slowly, the lantern's glow reflecting in his eyes. Talking to you, it makes the pain feel smaller. And talking to you, Evelyn replied gently, makes the world feel less empty. They both fell silent again. But this time it was the kind of silence that feels like comfort, not emptiness. Outside, the wind calmed almost completely, as if the storm had finally softened. The night sky darkened, but inside the house, the lantern continued to glow, casting a warm light on two people who had begun to understand each other's hidden wounds. And in that simple, gentle moment, both Evelyn and Caleb felt the weight on their hearts lighten, just a little, but enough to make breathing easier. As time passed, life started to move in a different direction, but the memories of the past did not fade. They stayed quietly in the heart, like old photos kept in a drawer, never thrown away, never forgotten. Every day seemed normal from the outside, but inside, emotions were shifting. Some days felt heavy and some days felt hopeful, and this mix of feelings created a journey that was not always easy, yet somehow necessary. There were moments when everything felt peaceful. The morning sun coming through the window, the warm tea in hand, and the calm silence around created a small world where everything felt all right. But just when comfort started to settle in, old thoughts would return, reminding that life is not always smooth. These sudden waves of memories would come without warning, and dealing with them became a part of the daily routine. Still, the heart kept moving forward. Even when things felt uncertain, there was always a small spark of strength inside. That spark kept saying, "You can continue." And because of that tiny encouragement, every day started with a new attempt to stay positive. It was not always successful, but the effort itself was a victory. During this time, new people also entered life. Some stayed for a while, some only for a moment, but each one taught something. Some brought kindness, and some brought lessons. Understanding people became easier. It became clear that everyone carries their own stories, their own challenges, and their own dreams. This realization created a soft corner in the heart for others, making life feel a little more meaningful. Sometimes there were long conversations, conversations that felt refreshing like rain after a hot day. Talking about hopes, fears, and plans brought a sense of connection. It felt good to be heard, and it felt good to listen. Human connection has a strange way of healing wounds without even trying. Just the feeling that someone understands is enough to make the heart lighter. There were also days when silence felt better than speaking. Sitting alone, thinking about life, and understanding one's own thoughts became a habit. This silence was not sad. It was peaceful. It gave space to understand what truly mattered and what did not. Slowly, priorities began to change. Instead of chasing things that looked shiny from the outside, the mind started to value things that brought real comfort, like stability, respect, trust, and calmness. Life outside continued as usual. Work had its own demands. Responsibilities kept calling. But even in the busiest hours, the mind kept returning to the inner journey. It felt like two versions of life were running side by side, the outer life that everyone could see, and the inner life that only the heart could feel. Balancing the two was not always easy, but somehow it worked. One important change happened when self-reflection became a regular practice. Looking back at old mistakes no longer felt painful. Instead, it felt like reading a book that had already been understood. Mistakes were not enemies anymore. They became teachers. They showed what should not be repeated and what should be improved. Accepting them brought relief. It felt like removing a heavy bag that had been carried for years. And with acceptance came forgiveness. Not forgiveness for others, but forgiveness for oneself. Realizing that being human means making mistakes made life simpler. The heart stopped fighting with the past, and slowly, peace started settling in. It was not a sudden change. It was slow and gentle, like dawn replacing the darkness of night. During this phase, dreams also started to look clearer. The future was still unknown, but now there was courage to walk toward it. The fear of failure reduced, and the desire to keep growing increased. Small achievements began to feel precious. A productive day, a good conversation, a quiet evening, everything became meaningful. Family played a special role, too. Their presence, even in silence, created a warm support system. A simple smile from them, a small gesture, or even a shared meal felt like comfort. It reminded that no matter how complicated life becomes, some relationships always remain steady. There were challenges as well, moments of confusion, disappointment, and stress. But unlike before, these challenges no longer felt unbearable. With every difficulty, the heart whispered, "This is temporary." That small reminder helped overcome many tough days. It became easier to breathe through problems rather than panic. Gradually, confidence returned. Not the loud kind of confidence that needs attention, but the quiet kind that comes from experience. The kind that makes you walk with calmness, speak with clarity, and smile without forcing it. It came from understanding that life will not always be perfect, and that is completely fine. One of the most important realizations during this journey was that happiness does not come from grand things. It comes from small, everyday moments. A meaningful message, a walk in fresh air, a good cup of tea, a peaceful night's sleep. These tiny things held more value than anything else. And when the heart started appreciating them, life naturally felt lighter. Soon there was a desire to rebuild everything with a better mindset. Not to erase the past, but to learn from it and move ahead. Plans were made, not huge plans, but simple ones. Plans that focused on growth, peace, and balance. Every day became a small step toward becoming a stronger and wiser version of oneself. As this transformation continued, the heart also became more patient. Things that once caused frustration no longer felt important. Situations that once felt heavy could now be handled with calmness. People's opinions carried less weight. The focus shifted to inner stability instead of outer judgments. And slowly, a new chapter of life began forming, one that was not controlled by fear or regret, but guided by clarity and hope. It felt like walking out of a long, confusing maze and finally seeing the open sky. The journey was still ongoing, but now the path felt brighter. This part of life was not about reaching a destination. It was about understanding oneself better, accepting what cannot be changed, and improving what can be. It was about growing silently, healing gently, and believing that better days are possible. Most importantly, it was about realizing that every step, whether good or bad, played an important role in shaping the person standing today. And that understanding brought a deep sense of peace, something that was long awaited. The next chapter of life began quietly, almost without any dramatic moment. It was not marked by a big event or a sudden change. Instead, it started with small, consistent shifts, thoughts becoming clearer, emotions becoming calmer, and plans taking shape slowly. Sometimes the most important changes happen silently, and this part of life was exactly like that. Every morning felt different from before. There was a new kind of energy, a gentle confidence that did not shout, but stayed steady inside. It felt like the heart had finally found a balance after a long, tiring storm. There was still a long way to go, but now each step felt purposeful. Even simple tasks like making breakfast, stepping outside, or organizing work felt meaningful, as if everything was contributing to something bigger. A new routine began to form. It was simple but comforting. Waking up early, spending a few minutes in silence, planning the day, and reminding oneself to stay patient became part of the morning. This routine brought a sense of control, not control over life, but control over the reaction to life. That was enough to make the days smoother. There were moments when motivation was high, and many tasks were completed with excitement. And then, there were moments when energy dipped, and everything felt slow. But instead of feeling frustrated, there was acceptance. Not every day needed to be perfect. Some days were for progress, and some days were for resting. Understanding this simple truth took away a lot of pressure. As time passed, the mind started to focus more on the future, not in a fearful way, but with hope. There were dreams that had been paused for a long time, waiting quietly in the background. Now they began to come forward again. The thought of working toward them brought a sense of purpose. It felt good to imagine the possibilities that the future could hold. Relationships also started to become clearer. The people who brought positivity and support began to stand out naturally. Their words, gestures, and presence added peace to life. Spending time with them brought joy, whether it was a simple chat or a shared laugh. These small interactions created a warm bond that felt safe and comforting. At the same time, the people who brought stress or confusion slowly started to fade from the center of life. It was not because of anger or dislike, but because the heart now understood the importance of peace. Some distances happen naturally when priorities change. Instead of trying to hold on to everything, it became easier to let go of what no longer fit. This quiet separation created space for better things to enter. There were days when old memories returned. Sometimes they brought a smile and sometimes a slight heaviness. But unlike before, the heart no longer felt lost in them. The past had lost its power to disturb. It became something to look back on with understanding, not sadness. Every memory, whether good or difficult, felt like a step in the journey that led to this stronger version of life. Self-growth became a central part of everyday living. Reading new things, learning new skills, and observing people with curiosity became enjoyable. It felt like rediscovering the world with fresh eyes. Even small pieces of knowledge felt valuable, like adding tiny lights to a dark room. The more knowledge entered, the easier it became to understand life's patterns. Work, too, became more meaningful. Tasks that once felt tiring now felt manageable. With a clear mind, decisions became better, reactions became calmer, and responsibilities felt lighter. Success was no longer measured by big achievements, but by consistency, discipline, and improvement. Every small win felt like progress. During this period, personal peace became a priority. Instead of chasing noisy happiness, the focus shifted to quiet joy. Joy that came from calm evenings, deep conversations, productive hours, or even simple solitude. It felt refreshing to enjoy life without rushing. This slow, steady pace created a strong emotional foundation. A strange but beautiful change happened inside as well. The heart became more grateful. It started noticing blessings that were once ignored: good health, supportive people, a comfortable home, small achievements, and even the ability to keep trying. Gratitude softened the heart and made life feel abundant, even without anything extravagant. Sometimes late at night, the mind drifted into reflection. Looking back at the journey, from the confusion of the past to the clarity of the present, created a sense of pride. The challenges survived, the lessons learned, and the growth achieved all formed a quiet strength. It felt good to acknowledge that life had not been easy, yet every phase had shaped a wiser, calmer individual. The inner voice that was once doubtful now became encouraging. It said things like, "You're doing well, keep going," and "better days are ahead." This positive inner dialogue brought comfort during stressful moments. Self-trust started growing, and that made a big difference. Believing in oneself made decisions easier and mistakes less frightening. Eventually, new goals began forming, goals that were realistic, grounded, and meaningful. They were not based on impressing anyone, but on improving life. These goals included building stability, strengthening emotional well-being, improving skills, and nurturing good relationships. Working on these goals brought satisfaction, even when progress was slow. There were also discoveries about what truly matters. Things like peace, loyalty, understanding, kindness, and patience gained more value. Meanwhile, things like unnecessary arguments, negative people, and unrealistic expectations lost importance. This shift in values made life feel simpler and more focused. Nature also played a role in healing. Walks in fresh air, watching sunsets, or simply looking at the sky brought a sense of calm. It reminded that the world is much bigger than any worry. These small moments with nature created a peaceful connection, helping the mind unwind. As days continued, confidence deepened. Challenges still came, but they were handled with a calmer heart. Uncertainty still existed, but it no longer caused fear. Instead, it felt like an open field full of possibilities. For the first time in a long while, the future felt welcoming. Slowly, life reached a point where balance was possible. Work, relationships, dreams, and inner peace all found their place. Nothing felt overwhelming anymore. Even when things did not go exactly as planned, there was trust that everything would eventually fall into place. What made this phase beautiful was the understanding that improvement is a lifelong journey. There is no final destination where everything becomes perfect. Instead, life keeps evolving, teaching, and shaping. Accepting this truth brought freedom, freedom from unrealistic expectations and unnecessary pressure. Now every day felt like a new chance, a chance to grow, to learn, to love, to forgive, to try again, and to create a better version of life. The heart became softer yet stronger, wiser yet humble, hopeful yet grounded. And this quiet transformation became the foundation of the new chapter, one built not on fear or regret, but on clarity, stability, and self-respect. The journey was far from over, but the direction was clear. And with every sunrise, the heart whispered the same simple promise: I will continue.